I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the playoff basketball podcast. I am Ben Dietrich. Jordan Rodelli has the day off, but never fear, Andrew Quo is in the building.
What's up, guy? Singular.
What's up, dude? How's it going, Quo?
Pretty good. Hanging out. A lot of things to see on the internet last night. A lot of things to watch on my TV.
That is exciting.
Pretty excited. I was up late catching up on all the jokes.
And I feel bad for all the fans who tuned in for their bi-weekly dose of Rodelli, and they're going to get a Rodelli-ous podcast.
It's tough because back-to-backs, take its toll after a while. You're not spring chicken anymore.
He's not a rookie. He's not a young guy. He's lost a little spring in his step.
Listen, when you're the GOAT, you have nothing to prove. What are you gonna? It's a meaningless game. Why would he risk injury in a meaningless game?
He's LeBron in LA.
Exactly, man.
He's
Space Jam 2ing it right now.
Look, he had to shut it down this week. He's got to record. He's got to dunk next week on camera.
The best dunks of his life on camera, over and over. In a green screen.
I'm thinking about LeBron right now, how focused he is on those upcoming Space Jam dunks.
He is so stressed about them, I bet. Right? Because it's like, okay, let's record the basketball podcast, the one with your best takes that everyone's going to see, make fun of you, or laud you for.
Because if you're LeBron, you can't use CGI. You can't have Could you get away with a rim that was 9.5? I think yes.
Yes, I think you could, but I think you could also tell immediately that it's 9.5, right? The only CGI they can get away with is lighting, speed. Can they emphasize his dunks? Is that going to be a false?
Pump the volume up so they sound more thunderous?
Yeah,
like a Nez Cantor thunderous?
Yeah, move the foul line back up front. I mean, move the foul line closer a couple inches.
You could definitely doctor up the court in real life. 9.5 foot rim, foul line, 2.5 feet short.
Yeah. I wonder if that's ever going to happen. You know how they have technology that, for politicians are really scared? You can put someone's face on anybody talking and it looks like them. So a politician...
deep fakes or whatever they're called.
Yeah, so someone could be saying something that they never said, but it would be on camera, or a police officer or anything. I wonder if we can do that with basketball. And it would be like the Running Man, right? The reveal at the end is the Warriors actually never played. You just watched what you thought was a championship.
The concerns that we have about technology rendering what we view as authentic or inauthentic as being something that's going to confront us in the very near future and be incredibly disruptive. On one hand, these are probably concerns that people have had since they heard radio.
Oh, yeah.
Just these sort of ideas that technology...
War of the Worlds, right?
Right. Will have such a disruptive effect on our version of reality that it will change and it'll change the way that humans interact with each other or think, etc. At the same time, if you can put a clip on of someone saying something that they didn't say and it's their face and it's indistinguishable from the way we are accustomed to digesting media, that seems like a problem.
Seems like a really big problem.
I can see that
right?
being a fucking issue.
Yeah, I don't know what we do from there, right? The authentication process, we're all terrified of facial recognition, but it's already out there. So I think someone went on Twitter a couple weeks ago. They were like, JetBlue, instead of giving over my boarding pass, I just had to put my face in front of a camera and they knew all my information. And she was outraged and shocked. And then immediately on Twitter, it was shot down and be like, oh, they have that already because of your passport. Your passport photo and his frame looks and is framed a certain way for that reason. So everyone has that information already. It's how they use it that's disturbing to us.
Yeah, and then I also am thinking about it now from a more sober perspective,
Oh,
because hangovers don't exist. And
if you're always hungover.
right. And we look at an article that we read, a story, and you see a quote from someone that seems unrealistic, and you say, they didn't really say that. So it's really someone could screenshot a quote. Our interns, for example, could make up a ludicrous quote that no one said
we let
and
them
put
out
it
of
up
their cages.
online, and you look at it and say, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a point when you look at someone, their face and their mouth, and hear their voice and be like, nah, not real.
Right.
Which is an odd jump, but we have done it with text. We have done it with maybe audio to some extent, because you can chop up the things that people say. So it's just another way of discerning between real and fake, which of course baby boomers can't do, and soon we'll be the baby boomers, and deep fakes will flummox us to no end, and we'll be spreading fake news everywhere, and our version of reality will be completely fucked, but younger generations will figure it out.
Right. A shout out to Nick Sylvester, who famously was writing about the game in the Village Voice and asked him in the article what his game face looked like. He just never met with him. He was just like, he didn't want to be a music writer. Hilarious. But also, it makes me think of one of our favorite shows, The Jinx, right? So it's going under trial, and the end reveal of that show when he was just like, I did it all. The editing had like switched, had framed it differently, and then when he said it, so they put one sentence in front of the other, so it made it seem like he was admitting guilt.
Like, what have I done? I killed them all, or something.
Right. He was basically talking to himself, like he muttering like nonsensical like outcomes of this scenario he was about to enter, and they rearranged the words to make it seem like he was having a coherent thought. And the audio came out uncut, and they're got to present that again. And now the people who made the movie are like, not on trial, but
Whatever the filmmaker's name is, I forget it, but he had an incredibly untrustworthy goatee.
that's right.
This does not shock me.
That's right.
You could
it was
not
like
look
Chris
at
Angel
that.
shit.
Yeah, you could not look at that goatee and say this guy is a legitimate journalist.
This is a very good point. This is like in like a shark movie or a weird Saw movie. The guy with the perfect goatee and like the slick Vegas style jacket. He's gonna die first.
It's kind of what Jordan was talking about with Colin Farrell and having
right.
the magicians, not even the goatee, it was just the little soul patch thing. And you're like, this is not a trustworthy protagonist. I can't root for this man.
Right, like in nature, no neutral animal goes up to a snake and is just like, "Oh, my friend." They go up to a rabbit and it's like, "What's up, homie?" Unless I want to eat the rabbit. No one wants to eat the snake.
Unless you're a mongoose.
Shout out to mongoose.
But mongoose can
Mongai.
spot snakes, which are the goatees of nature.
Are snakes the goatees of nature?
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, mind freak.
Okay.
Focus.
I'm trying to rein it back here.
Speaking of the mongoose of the world, you watched the Met Gala coverage last night?
I did not. There was some NBA coverage. I wasn't on the Met Gala after party beat this year, though.
By choice, or just is it random?
I didn't talk to my editor about covering it, so
Why not?
I was probably at a mutual, departure for both of us. Like, I didn't ask about it. He didn't inquire. We just, kept it moving.
Is it fruitful? Like, you've covered it how many times?
Once or twice. I covered it last year.
Is there anything else that is interesting to you, like a second or third time? Does it keep on changing, or once you do it once, as a kind of fan of fashion and nightlife as you are, does it have a ceiling? Is it Luol Deng?
Just to be clear, I've covered the after party part
Sure.
and not the actual event itself, which they do send writers there, but it's far more about the photography. So the after party coverage is typically, this is for the New York Times style section, and it falls in line with a lot of the other stuff that I've done, whether it's at Art Basel or Fashion Week, the sort of highfalutin, it's not the, like, here's a fun bar. It's like, find a celebrity, get a quote from them, work with a photographer to get a shot of that person, and then Like, here's Jared Leto, or Leto, or whatever his name is.
Who crushed it last night?
Right, and there'll be a photo of him, and then I'll try to fight through a crowd of other famous people or security or other revelers to try to confront them and get a dumb quote about what they're wearing or the event. It's not the most. It's not like being in Libya and covering in, say, the Arab Spring.
No, I agree.
So I've done that a lot, but last year's Met Gala after parties were kind of fun because I talked to a lot of the people from Black Panther. So there was
Oh, that was a moment.
yeah, there were people who were experiencing that for the first time and really enthusiastic, and it was a cool scene.
What was up with the lack of Avengers this year?
I have no idea. I don't know who the Avengers are.
It's a bunch of characters that grown men play for children to enjoy on their iPads when their parents don't want to be bothered.
Are they camp?
It's not quite camp, but they're in colorful outfits.
So you're saying the Avengers, not camp?
No camp shaming with the Avengers.
No, I would not camp shame. Yeah, so I experienced the Met Gala like everyone else who logs onto Twitter in a absolute torrent of photos and critiques of people's outfits, even if you weren't really interested in what they were wearing, basically all afternoon and all last night with, the images of Frank Ocean wearing like a Prada windbreaker or
Kanye doing the whole Dave's thing.
Exactly. And occasionally someone would slay and occasionally someone would not. And that seems to be the internet's reaction overall.
Right, and it usually kind of lines up with how we feel about that person before we see their outfit. So we just know how we're going to feel about their outfit as a community on Twitter. And I think like something like the Met Gala is a little bit of a challenge for a certain demographic because it's like one of those New York things where you're just like, were you invited? Do you know someone who was invited? And you're like, no, but I don't really care. Like as a visual artist, like I want to be in the Whitney Biennial so bad. And every time a list comes out, I'm like, it's okay. I don't know. A lot of people do it every year. But in my heart, I'm just like, I'd really love to be a part of that show,
There are definitely notable kind of celebrities who have to be conspicuously absent from social media to keep the illusion that perhaps they were there and no one saw them.
That's right.
Because, yeah, it's definitely a litmus test for, are you fashionable? Are you newsworthy? Are you someone that
Relevant.
Anna Wintour thinks would make her party? Can you add to her party?
Yeah, this is a question I had on a previous Cookies. It's like TSA. When you get into a plane and you're a celebrity and be like, listen, I don't want to wait. People will recognize me and it'll create a bottleneck. Like, we don't want that. And they're like, man, you have an Oscar, but like no one knows who you are. So you're like.
I don't really know how the hierarchy goes necessarily, but for example, I know sometimes you can get a +1, sometimes you don't.
Oh, like everything, like shows or.
Like I know
anything you're invited
someone
to.
who went last year with a +1 and didn't get a +1 this year. And is that a reflection on the venue, on
It's a bummer, man.
the amount of people that are coming, or
Yeah.
is it a judgment on that person saying that you were a bigger star last year than you are now? I have no idea.
Oh, what if you're?
And I'm not
like-
even suggesting that. I'm just saying there's all those weird social dynamics at play.
And I always think about that during the Met Gala because what if you were invited with a +1 and you're like, cool, I'd like to wear one of those beautiful dresses that like Rihanna wore that like drag 15 feet behind me. And they're like, no, only 2 people can do that and you're not one of them. It's like all these things at play. It's like you have to wear something self-contained, because we allot that space and that airtime for someone else.
I would like to come borne upon the shoulders of
Right.
6 shirtless men.
That was awesome.
That was awesome. You can't come like that.
Yeah.
No. I want that. I've got 6 guys. They're down. No, you can't do that.
And then the weird thing yesterday was like even smaller than that. Ezra Miller is just like, oh, I want to have like a mask of myself around me and I'm going to paint my face. Pretty cool. Looks cool. And then Jared Leto is like, oh, I'm going to have a head of myself and I'm going to carry it around. I'm like, 1 head, two heads? Like, was there any sort of like dialogue? Do you have to like check in with like Anna Wintour's team and be like, yo, I'm going to be carrying a head around of myself? It's like, oh, Ezra Miller's doing that too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any information exchange because you want people, of course, to be unique and not do the same thing as someone else, but maybe you also can't sort of tip someone's hand because it's such a surprise. But then again, I mean, they do know who the designers are for the most part. They'll assign designers to guests, etc.
And Nicki Minaj kind of like shaded her designer. Like in an interview on the steps, someone was just like, "You look great. How is this camp?" And she was like, "I have no idea. This is my designer. Ask him." Because she was kind of disappointed that she wasn't getting the attention because her outfit was nice and was awesome, but it wasn't like it was a ball gown. It wasn't. She wasn't carrying like two heads of herself, which would be amazing. It's like you have one head of yourself. I have two.
Like one of Cardi B in one arm and then one of Little Kim in the other.
That's right.
Like just really lay down some ground
Slaying.
rules here.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, I did not go to the after parties. I assume they were fun.
Oh, you sound kind of. You couldn't get a +1.
I'll be honest. No, I won't be honest. I'm sure they were fun.
Yeah, no,
I'm gonna leave it at that.
no, that stuff is always fun, and it's always like trying to figure out like how you feel about being included or excluded from something. But at this point in New York, it's like it's all fun. I saw one of my friends. I'm like, "What are you doing? It's a beautiful day. Why do you have like a tripod, a backpack, and camera?" She's like, "I'm going up to the Met." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Are you in the pit, like in the photo pit?" And she's like, "No, I just want to try to see if I can take some pictures." I'm like, "That's amazing." I thought
Yeah,
that was
I
cool.
can't separate those events from working at them.
For sure.
So even if I'm there with friends or you're there to party, I'm always viewed as press. Like if I run into photographers that I know, it's not like they're like, "Oh, yeah, get a shot of you." It's like, "Oh, you must be working."
What you're saying right now is like really cuts deep with me because I still have anxiety thoughts. When I was in high school, I did a New York like Xerox punk zine, right? So I just go to shows and like try to get interviews with bands, like anybody, the drummer, the bassist, anybody. And it would totally ruin my experience of the show because I'd be like, I just want to get the drummer of Codeine to go on and be like, what was high school like for you? And just try to get like a page out of it. Like Codeine's in my issue, or like a slowcore band. Or every fucking show, I'd be like, I just need to talk to somebody because like I got to make this show worth it. They live in Seattle, you know? Still have stress about it like as an adult. I'm just like, I can't live in the moment. I'm like, how do I document this? It's like, oh, I got to post something on Twitter because like I'm here. And I just can't be here. I have to like get some information.
And even that sort of juvenile joy of getting into the hot party of, all right, well, I'm in.
Yeah.
We
I'm
did
in the
it.
show, right?
That I can't get that anymore because being pressed, you're always in.
Yes, right.
You're always there for work. You're not even viewed as, all right, you seem cool. Come on inside. It's utilitarian.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the guy who writes the newspaper. Get him inside so hopefully he'll write something about our event. There's no like, oh, it's you. You'd make this party more fun. It's strictly business.
Dude, yeah, for when I started working at the New York Times doing music stuff, it happened immediately. I was just like, oh, the whole feeling of this thing has changed. You know, it's like, of course, I'm first and foremost like excited to see these bands, even like bands that I'm not necessarily even that into. I just love shows. And then after a while, it just felt different. You know, my whole function felt different.
Yeah, and I'm not even complaining. You can have fun
Yeah,
at all
it's
these
awesome.
things.
It's
They're
awesome.
great.
Yeah.
This is not a knock on that. It's just, it's a little different from when you're out there trying to squirm your way into a party and you see someone you know and they're like, hey, he's good. And the bouncer is like, all right, two more. And you kind of weasel your way in and you're like, we did it. We're in the party. Let's get some drinks. Let's see who's here. It's not the same thing.
Is facial recognition going to eliminate the bouncer role?
So I did a little story actually, maybe 3 years ago, about an app that kind of does that. It's an iPad. I guess you could put it on your phone, but it's an iPad app that shows people's faces versus kind of having to go through a ream of papers and look for it,
Yeah.
or just have
And you
'cause
have
no one's
like a
gonna do
credit
that.
score as a person, right?
I mean,
Like,
this
it's a
did not do this.
9.1 waiting there, you know? Or,
Well, this was more like we've got a guest list,
right.
and there was there have been some issues with people using other people's names. That goes on forever.
Oh, yeah.
I used to
If
do
you're
that all the-
Asian, yeah, you can use my name. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, there was a guy who worked in media who had a very similar name to mine when I first moved to New York. I would say my name and they'd give his, and I'd just walk in all the time.
And of course, and at that point, when you're not the nightlife Batman, the door people know who you are, and they're like, "You're not Ben, but just go in."
Weirdly enough, someone used my name for a couple different events in the same week. This was a few years ago. And a few people that I didn't know, I showed up to cover events, and like, no, you're already here.
Oh, that's annoying.
And I was like, no, I'm not. Like,
Yeah.
here's my ID. And they're like, oh, well, you're already here according to our list. Someone used your name. And I was like, oh, it must be a mistake. And then I went to another event, and someone had done the same. So
Smart.
someone was Dietrich getting up.
You
around
need a
town.
nom de guerre. You need to be like Pat Connington. But that happens sometimes, like when you're just like sitting at the bar and someone rolls up and is like, "Yeah, can I get like 3 vodka sodas?" It's on someone else's card. I'm like, either this is cool or very not cool. I'll never know. Someone might get into a fight later, or someone will never find out. You know. But no, but back to the facial recognition thing. It made me think like all these weird outcomes of technology. Like let's say you did have like a social score. Like people really like you. You go to a lot of events. You show up. Like not unlike Foursquare. Like you're the mayor of Dime Square.
But
You have
isn't
9.8.
China doing sort of a version of this? And it was
Yo, they kidnapped
it was a bit satirical
woman.
in Black Mirror. I think the first episode of the last season, they kind of did that idea that
With Bryce Dallas Howard.
you walk around sort of getting judged and getting star ratings for social interactions, almost like an Uber driver.
Well, this is where I was going with it because I was going to bring up Black Mirror, and like that has a very pessimistic view of humanity, which is entertaining and fun. I kind of like that show, but I always thought every one of those shows, sort of like the Twilight Zone, could be reversed to show something positive. Like all you have to do is like switch something small in the script, and every one of those Black Mirror episodes that's supposed to teach us a cautionary tale could teach us like a loving tale about humanity. You know, it's just like, oh, you have a score, and you need someone's help, and they check out, and everything is fine. You know, like
Someone who goes through the entire day being rude to people, at the end they get their comeuppance
Yeah.
because they're covered with mud by a roadside, and no one will pick them up because they've been mean.
Well, I mean, I like Dimes. I think what they do is cool, but you know, it's called Dimes because they thought that all their customers should be tens, which I think is, you know, funny in this conversation, and not in terms of like social score, but in terms of '90s rap. You know,
But you're the prince of Dime Square.
in theory, I'm just around there a lot, man.
Interesting.
That's where my favorite pizza is. That's where we get our hats done. Our interns get our hats done.
No need to give up the whole game.
But speaking of lists, I saw a really weird show this Sunday. I was someone else's plus one. Vampire Weekend at Webster Hall did a show that was 3 sets. Their album just came out, Father of the Bride. Kind of an amazing record.
A shout out to Chris Thompson, who has come on Cookies twice, I believe. Friend of the pod. And hopefully we'll have him on soon. But anyway,
Diehard Nets fan.
Nets guy.
So
Yeah.
he should be happy these days. But so it was an awesome show. The first set was covers that started at 11 a.m. And it was like an hour break. They served everyone bagels from Essa Bagel. So it was pitched as like an all-day show where they're going to play the new album, which is a double album in its entirety in order with pizza and bagels. So you just show up in the morning and you stay all day at Webster
So it
Hall.
was carb on carb.
It was carb on carb, for sure. And it was okay. It was cool. So the big debate was where they would get their bagels and pizza from.
What's interesting is that a pizza bagel is not carb on carb. It's one carb.
It's one carb.
Despite the name, it's not actually carb on carb.
Okay, this gets really confusing because what if you have 2 pizza bagels? That's carb on carb. Because you could call one a pizza and one a bagel,
Well, if you had pizza and the toppings were bagel, that would be carb on carb.
which one of my friends does. He makes pizzas and puts mini pizzas on top or like other carbs.
That's carb on carb.
That's carb on carb. But you know my point with the pizza bagel. If you have two, you could just call it a pizza or a bagel, and then all of a sudden it's carb on carb.
You're saying if you close it up,
No,
it becomes carb on carb, like in a literal sense?
no. If you eat it, and then you wait and you grab another one and eat another one,
That does not count.
it
That
has to be the same bite.
You're perverting the definition of carb on carb.
I'm trying.
You're now saying if you have 2 pieces of pizza, you're going carb on carb.
I guess my question is, how do you frame the pizza or the bagel? Is it more of a pizza or more of a bagel?
This is a little more existential than I was hoping for.
Well, anyway, Vampire Weekend was one of my favorite bands, and I realized like I've gotten so old with that band. They have 4 albums out now, and it sort of felt like a player getting older. It felt like Dirk Nowitzki or Dwayne Wade to me a little bit. Like they're not done by any means. I think they're going to make a zillion more albums, but it felt a little bit like the Father of the Bride album title is kind of an allusion to his new the singer's new family. The father of his partner is Quincy Jones, so it was like kind of a music industry wink, I think. And
Wait, who's he married to?
Rashida Jones, or he had a baby with Rashida Jones.
Oh, okay.
But
I mean, I feel like I should have known that, but
I think
I
it's
did
like
not.
it's on the internet, but it's not. I don't think no one really cares about it. But it's an interesting thing to point out in the album title. But it's awesome, and they're gonna be a good band for a long time, and they're changing. They're not saying the same at all, and I feel like they're a deeply New York band. Like my friend was saying, like when you think of New York bands in our generation, you think of like the Strokes, Fair, LCD, Fine, whatever.
yes.
Yes, absolutely. But it's actually Vampire Weekend. Like they've had more sustained excellence in all those bands, in my opinion. But I just like them more, maybe. But it was awesome. But it felt to me like the Dirk Nowitzki feeling of this year, or like just watching one of your favorite players, like still good, but like they're a little different.
Dwayne Wade.
Sure, Dwayne Wade, but who?
Mello.
I love Mello. It might be Mello.
Manu. I'm just going to name old players. Vince.
Manu.
Okay. Acceptable.
Better than Dwayne Wade, right?
You're the one who's the show, and I'm just naming old guys.
So the pizza was from Stromboli. So we were trying to figure out. So, okay, this is a logistical question. How do you feed that many people and make sure, assuming everyone, just because the pizza's free, are going to grab 3 slices? How do you make sure everyone eats?
Yeah, that's beyond my my pay grade.
So, okay, a better question.
Like, do you have a theory on this? Like, is there you're saying, okay, for every one person, you need to have 1/4 of a pie, like a third of a pie? Like, what's
Just
what's
because
the
it's
math?
free, because people just take more. Like, people just walk away with more food, and they'll eat more food if it's free. I would guess 2.5 to 3 slices a person, but I saw it happen, and basically the Stromboli people were like delivering 12 pies at a time. They would disappear, and then we'd wait 10 more minutes, and there would be 12 more pies.
Were they being delivered in cardboard boxes?
Yes, by people frantically running in and out with cars. And if you're a pizza shop near Webster Hall, I really enjoyed the name of the club in relation to anticipating the games of that.
Martell Webster Hall.
That's right. If you're a Stromboli Pizza on St. Mark's and the Vampire Weekend team calls you and be like, yo, listen, we need like 400 pizzas on Sunday. What do? Do you rent out a place in Brooklyn with like ovens? Is there a place in Brooklyn that could like produce pies at that clip? Because you're not doing it at your restaurant. Unless you shut down your restaurant, and you can't do that. It's off-site, right?
Got to be offsite.
If you were Vampire Weekend, would you call like 3 different pizza spots and be like, can you just guys, the 3 of you, just start delivering pizza in unison?
Maybe you'd have to find a chain that has multiple outlets.
Which one would it be, though? Because Joe's was nearby, but Joe's is too hard to get. I think Joe says no.
Joe's would be a good option because there's 4 of them, maybe.
But they're always jammed. Like they're making money hand over fist anyway.
Yeah, they don't need your business.
Also, side note, Joe's to go when you order Joe's delivery, much different than Joe's reheated on in the moment.
Yeah, it is a logistical problem. Have you ever had a Stromboli?
Of course, come on, man.
No, I have, but Strombolis and calzones, just not really doing it. Have you ever had a good calzone?
No,
I don't think anyone's
it's too
ever-
bready. It's too bready.
I don't
But
think anyone's ever had a good calzone.
I've never had a pizzone, but that's one of my favorite ideas in all of food.
You just like the portmanteau.
You know, the pizzone is Pizza Hut's answer to the calzone, which is basically like a folded pizza that has been pinched. So it's
But that's all a calzone is anyway.
for sure, but like there's somebody that has to do a calzone well. Okay, I don't know the answer to this, but is a traditional calzone, does it have sauce inside? It's always outside, right? On the side. So calzone just has cheese and filling, I believe, in pizza dough.
Yes, you could put sauce inside, but typically it's a pizza toppings sans sauce bound together by the crust. It's really a folded pizza,
Yes.
but it also has an unnecessary specific heat in which it
retains too much damn
really
heat,
fucking
man.
hot.
Too much.
So you try to get into
Or
it.
really fucking cold.
Yeah, it just doesn't work right. Like
Yeah.
you can't heat it up adequately or cool it down adequately. And then you're just sort of eating the crust, and then you've got this middle section that's just a glop of cheese and pepperoni and sausage.
I don't like empanadas. Is that weird? For the same reason, because the outside has too much dough and the inside is always too molten or too hot.
Small empanadas I like when they're baked. Do not like the deep fried empanadas.
I mean, that's fair, but it depends on how they bake it and how they deep fry it, right?
Well, what's kind of cool is in the nations of the world in which empanadas are extremely popular, they have different ways of folding the crust for
True.
the fillings, which is kind of cool. So there's a specific way that you fold it so people know it's a vegetarian one or a beef one or a cheese one. I kind of think that's awesome.
Dude, my favorite thing in the world is in medieval times when they had like basically big ass calzones for dinner. They would have the meat filling on one end and then fruit filling at the end, and there would be a directional signal as to what end was the meat filling. So you eat it in order, so your dessert was in the same container. It's awesome.
It's kind of just Lunchables.
No, a Lunchables has like 4 compartments that you have to combine. Right?
Yeah, but I'm just sort of mean like in one thing.
Lunchables like was after my time. I didn't really enjoy those as a child, but as an adult, I had a couple Lunchables, and you're just tempted not to make sandwiches out of it, right? Okay, so here's a bigger question for you.
Okay, finally, let's get to something important.
When you have a Jewish bagel spread in the morning, right? You go to Russ and Daughters, their new restaurant, awesome. You sit down, you're like, I want the bagel spread with the cream cheese, the tomatoes, the lox, and they give it to you on a board, and it's usually like 2 bagels, a pile of fish, a pile of vegetables, and like some capers and onions. What do you do? I'm like, can't you just make me a sandwich? Like, what is this presentation? Am I supposed to like rip off some bagel and make individual kinds of bites? Because all I'm doing is constructing a sandwich that you could have just done back there. Because I can only have 1 sandwich. I'm not having 2 sandwiches, right? It's a lot of bagel.
It's amazing how much bagel
So much bagel.
that I used to eat growing up. You'd be like, yeah, get a bag of bagels. I'll have 3.
No, get
As a
outta
kid,
here.
you just kind of just gorge on whatever's around. You're like, yeah, I'll eat 3 bagels.
You
over the
also
course
claim
of
you could dunk.
Yeah, until I started eating 3 bagels every morning.
Do you scoop bagels, toast? What's your vibe?
Hell no.
I've seen you eat bagels. I know what you do.
I'm not a weirdo who has like salmon and cinnamon raisin. I'm not
Delicious.
I'm not a freak.
The Cynthia Nixon.
It's disgusting.
I love it.
All right, let's get on to some basketball here. I know you're getting warmed up. You're like just running bagels for no reason whatsoever. Just like, and can we talk bagels?
No, Essa bagel, man. A distinctly New York thing like our band Vampire
You've
Weekend.
definitely brought up bagels on at least 4 different episodes.
I love talking about bagels. It's very controversial. People have no bagel humor, man. It's one way or another.
Without Jordan here,
We'll go off the rails.
in my mind, I was like, we got to keep Quo away from pizza and bagels. And I just realized,
blew
what
it.
did we talk about? Pizza and bagels.
You're a terrible host, man.
It was my fault, but you went carb on carb.
I'm a carb on carb kind of guy.
You know who else is a carb on carb kind of guy?
What's on our list to talk about?
Kyrie.
Is Big Baby still on Boston?
Well, in basketball news, Boston had a huge game last night. It was the climactic, not climactic, the pivotal 2-1 matchup, which either
A weird must-win situation.
either ties up the series or puts you in a dank hole.
You gotta hold serve, right? Like a tennis player falls behind as soon as they get broken. So as soon as you get broken at home, you're in big trouble.
So the Celtics came out in this series and they waxed the Bucks in the first game.
I don't like that word, but go on.
They look great. After that, we've seen results that were more expected based on the relative quality of these teams. Boston is a good team. They just had the unfortunate luck of going against one of the NBA's very most elite squads. As weird as it sounds to say that, because they have not had previous postseason success, and that's kind of how we judge like the scariness of an opponent. The Bucks have proven they are a very, very, very good team, and they have now taken control of the series against Boston, doing what we described on the show over the last few weeks, keeping it simple. Giannis attacks the basket, dunks on your head. They have shooters around him who then attack the basket after he kicks the ball out, and they play defense. And they
rotate and they sub in and out and they're deep, and then
they did what they do.
Yeah, Lopez is a release valve. Yeah, man, it's somewhat without much drama, right? Like it doesn't even feel like we've seen Milwaukee go at 100 miles an hour yet.
It's an interestingly bloodless series in a way, and it doesn't mean that both teams aren't good and it's tough defensively, and Giannis is not enthusiastic about dunking and growling and flexing. Like, all that's happening. There's also the feeling that these teams don't have anything personal here. There's not stakes outside of winning and losing. In that Boston wants to win. They don't care if they lose to the Bucks, versus if they lost to the Sixers, they'd be fucking mad.
I agree, yeah.
And the Bucks, they want to beat the Celtics, but I don't know, maybe they played last year. Maybe I'm just not picking up on those vibes, but there doesn't seem to be that kind of animosity, except from like Eric Bledsoe. He's the only one who actually seems like mad.
I love him so much, and he's not playing extraordinarily well in the box score, but he's an impact player on the floor.
Or maybe it's just been too easy for the Bucks after that first game. Maybe that's what I'm seeing, that it's now a 10-point game in the fourth quarter. The Celtics try to come back and they just can't. And it doesn't have that gnarliness that a close game has. I don't know. I could be wrong. It just doesn't strike me as having a bitterness to that series that I kind of thought it would have.
If you're a fan of any team like the Boston Celtics, this is exactly how you want to go out, right? It's like, oh, it's because our best player is grouchy and he's going to leave anyway. We're done with him. We've been done with him. Oh, we're playing the number one seed and the best player in the NBA. Okay, of course we're going to lose. We have no chance. Like, this is how you want to go out, because there's no chance at winning this thing, morally or in the box score.
You saw some of that last night popping up on Twitter, where people were searching and grasping for those moral fibers, if you will, where they wanted to say, Kyrie doesn't take this seriously. He didn't step up. It's like, yeah, man, he shot shitty.
Yeah, the shots didn't go down.
Like,
Yeah.
that's basketball, man. They
Yeah.
played good D. He missed some shots. Like, what do you want?
It's good. Yeah, right. People were coming after his quotes that he made earlier in the season, just being like, I play to win, and when it's time, I'm a champion. I'm going to sun these guys when it counts, and my teammates will all come around, and I've been here before, so trust me. When we're there, I'll be the one. And he called himself a basketball genius, and all those things are correct. The shots just didn't go down.
Kyrie's marvelous at basketball. He's won an NBA championship hitting a decisive 3 over Steph Curry, the 2-time MVP, to have one of the greatest upsets in NBA history. Kyrie can say whatever he wants.
And it's funny when he comes out and is like, I'm a basketball genius. People are like, yeah, we'll see about that if you shoot well. And I'm like, no, this guy, it's clear this guy is on another level, man.
It was clear that Kyrie didn't want his shots to go in as much as as much as the Bucks wanted him to miss.
Right.
Who wants it more? Oh, the Bucks just wanted that to rim out or brick a little bit more than he wanted it to successfully swish through the net.
You didn't want that to miss as much as the other team did.
And then Kyrie left the court right before the game ended, and people were mad about that. And he was like, well, the game was over.
He's right about
These
that.
are the things I can never get mad at someone for.
No, he's awesome. He took it personal, man. He was really upset. That's fine. Like,
He had a bad game. He was mad. They really needed that win. It was huge.
Yeah.
It essentially ended their season. And you're
Yeah.
like, he should have stood out there and what? Why would you care? Why would you care if a dude leaves the court?
I mean, I love sportsmanship because, like, it's nice to see happy people who are previously, like, enemies, you know? Like, that's a cool thing to see. I'm not against it. I also don't care about it. And I know, like, this whole thing has to function with villains, right? And, like, you can't hate Darth Vader anymore because he's the coolest character. There is no Star Wars without Darth Vader.
But it's so obvious that the villain here is going to be Kyrie. The guy that
Yeah,
gets
oh
shit
my
on is going to be Kyrie because
This has been manufactured since as soon as people saw that Jason Tatum wasn't going to be that good.
and also he was the one who wanted his own team.
Yeah.
He was the one who has a personality. He's the one who says funny things. He's the millennial, as we've talked about on the show. He's emblematic of youth, of this approach to sports that's different from the kind of mechanical, militaristic, like jock way of looking at things.
He's got that.
And he will be vilified for that.
Yeah, he has that millennial point of view. It's just like, play a game in my shoes. You'll never know what I feel. And people are like, yes, we do. And I'm like, no. I mean, he has kind of like a point here, you know?
I'm not saying people can't roast Kyrie. That's
he's
that's
a villain.
That's what sports are for.
He brings it on,
You're
right?
supposed to roast people.
Yeah.
I'm more saying it's obvious that he's going to be the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they were booed off the floor by the Boston fans at the end of that game.
Which I'm not even mad at. Like, I'm not a boo truther, you know? Like, just do it, you know? And it's not quite over, but I mean, I hate to bring up like things we've said before, but like this team was in trouble as soon as we saw Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown not turn into a kind of player we wanted them to be. And we joke, but like if they were even as close to as good as Luol Deng, they'd be in better shape. You know, like
They got a couple of Martell Websters out there.
who is not bad. Who is not bad. You play Martell Webster if you have him.
They turned TD Garden, TD
TD.
Arena into Martell Webster Hall.
It was worth the wait.
I was trying to get there.
I love it. I love it.
I had to slog my way to that punchline. But the Hayward issue is really what's haunted the Celtics team. Because as critical of we've been of the perception of those Boston guys, they weren't better last year. They're the same.
That's fair. That's fair.
Did Hayward make a leap? No. But he was fine.
You mean Tatum?
I'm sorry, yeah. Tatum did not make a leap. Brown started the season struggling, and then
His scouting report has been the same since college.
and then played better down the stretch. He was actually okay in this series so far.
No, usable guys, but not like
But the reason they're not the team that they were supposed to be is Gordon Hayward. He was a borderline top 20 player, probably a top 30 player, a star. And he's not one. He's not a good player. He's an utterly mediocre player. He can shoot, he can pass a bit, he can't create, he can't really defend. He's just a mediocre dude. I think he averaged 7 points a game in 30 minutes a night. Like,
taking up a ton of cap space.
he's the problem.
Yeah, and it's a shame, right? Because as a fan of the league, this league, I think like Gordon Hayward,
Best league.
yeah, like a white guy with a sharp haircut, on a max contract in Boston, like we want him to be awesome. Like, you know, like this is everything is lining up. And the fact that he's not good, you're just like, oh, this would have been super fun for the next 5 years.
But right, if you look at that Boston team, that's the issue. Smart, good player. Kyrie, great. Hal Orford, still really, really good.
Very good.
They had a good team. They just couldn't jump from good to great because
Injury.
they didn't get Hayward at the player they thought they were acquiring when they signed him to a huge deal. And they didn't luck out and get a huge leap from one of those young guys.
Well,
So basically
before you go on,
oh,
like Hayward got injured, and that was it turns out to be a really serious injury.
yeah, of course.
So-
no, they were unlucky.
They got the player that they wanted because it was exactly the player that they saw, and then that player changed.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm not implying it was a mistake on their part. I just mean
Everyone wanted Hayward.
that's what I mean.
They won that sweepstakes.
They got a guy who was a star, and they ended up with a total non-star. And without a crescendo of development from a Jason Tatum, they just don't have the horses to match up with a team that has Giannis.
Right, and it's asking too much of Tatum and Brown to take that leap that Hayward was supposed to occupy. This was supposed to be a deep team with a ton of talent, and
They were a top 10 offensive team. They were top 7 defensively. They had a top 6 expected record.
beloved coach who everyone thought was smarter than everyone.
This was a top
still
5
smart.
team. They lost to a top 1 team.
Yes, this is the best way to go out. If you're a diehard Boston fan, this is the way to do it, right? Like you don't feel bad about this loss.
It's not an indictment of Boston. It does, however, lead into a situation that we've been talking about for most of this season, which is Boston has a good chance of now entering kind of a rebuild. And we've joked about it, but if Kyrie leaves, they've got to decide, do you want to pay Al Horford to keep this team together? Do you bring back Rozier?
What do you do with Anthony Davis? As you know, they've threatened to try to trade Tatum and pieces for Davis,
But
and
if-
he's a rental too.
And if you're the Celtics, do you say, we'll give you all these picks and Tatum and
If you're New Orleans, would you even do that anymore?
no?
I wouldn't
That's what
either.
I'm saying. They're in a tough position where they have the assets to trade for another star, but you've got $30 million tied up in Hayward, who's not a good player.
And they lost a trade with New Jersey. I mean, the Brooklyn Nets.
Billy King is dancing on your grave. He had the longest view in the room, and Billy King planted an orchard, and now he's harvesting his crops at the moon.
Do you think all this player power and player movement, because of player dictated contracts and player outs and like 2 to 3 year deals, and for example, Kyrie and AD, how they affect something like in Boston, do you think that's going to be good for the league moving forward? Is this more fun or less fun?
It's hard to say because player movement has become the secondary NBA season. And as much as teams might be irritated by players asking to leave, pushing to be freed from current franchises, at the same time, if you're the fans, you want this stuff to happen. We live on it. It's the soap opera. It's
It's the
changing
placebo, right.
It's a placebo. But it's changing alliances, rivalries, guys betraying
works.
their teams to leave, etc. And yeah, we're not going to get too many guys who are. You can't sign the Kevin Garnett 10-year deal and just be on a team for your career. That just doesn't happen. So owners wanted short contracts so they wouldn't get screwed over by giving someone too much money in too many years. But now they're like, well, wait a minute. I signed this guy to a 4-year deal, and now after a year and a half, he's already barking about me having to trade him. This isn't cool. So
Is
we
this
might-
a representational issue? Is this like, in terms of player representation, is it LeBron showing everyone being like, oh, you can do whatever you want, kind of? If you're good enough, like Anthony Davis being like, you represent yourself or you hire someone to speak on your behalf that you trust and you can dictate your future because you only have that many seasons to play.
Well, there's always going to be this struggle for power between ownership and players. And now that players have more of a voice and people are more, at least in my opinion, more sympathetic to players now than they were, say, 10 years ago. That's just my general feeling.
Yeah.
I think that sort of that anger that fans have towards players who thwart their own franchise, it's still there, but people are a little more.
We're aging out of that.
Yeah,
story.
that feels vestigial.
Yeah, because we see the proof over and over that like teams don't like Boston did IT dirty, man. Like certain people always bring that up. I'm like, that's right. Let's scream this from the mountaintops. They did him so dirty
And
for
that
this
happens,
run.
and it happens all the time.
Yes, which is fair. I'm not saying they should not have done that. I'm saying that's just a product of this mechanism, right?
You know, at the end of the season, the Miami Heat had Wayne Ellington on their team, and he'd been there for
right.
the duration of his career. All 3 years he'd been there. Didn't make that much money, and they basically just cut him loose because with 3 days left in the season, even though they were still in the playoff hunt, because they didn't feel like paying luxury tax. So, like, you can talk about Miami culture, blah, blah, blah. Man, you guys had a dude his entire career. He was in practice with you every day, and you cut him loose to save a couple of bucks. Like, fuck off.
But they're like, Udonis Haslem. We kept the same player his whole career. What about him? It's like misdirection always.
But I think people are now more aware and more cynical about the way that teams.
Yes.
Like, look, we've all become these weird armchair GMs where we talk about what's good for the team, salary caps, etc. But we can also acknowledge that those are not necessarily great for the players. And I remember personally talking to a guy who was one of the guys that the Sixers had acquired during Sam Hinkie's tenure, where they were just, it was a carousel of players. And there were guys that they acquired and then just immediately cut. And this guy was like, I got fucked in the ass by the Sixers. And I was like, what do you mean? You know, because I hadn't thought about it from a player's perspective. He's like, oh, they fucked me right in the ass. And I was like, how?
He actually said that?
Yeah, that's a direct quote. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, I was on a team. I'm rehabbing an injury. I'm traveling with them. I'm flying with them. I'm a member of a group. And now I'm not on one. They didn't even call me. They traded for me and cut me. I didn't even hear from them. Nothing. And now I don't have a team. I got to go back home and rehab my leg by myself. And like, that's just unfortunate. And it is a business. But there are points where you're like, you know what? I don't think Sam Hinkie did anything wrong. But let's remember the players don't have to abide by a different moral code than ownership and management. That's my whole thing. Totally legit. If Sam Hinkie says, well, this is just a money thing. We're going to take him on, get a second round contract, cut him loose. But the players don't have to have some allegiance to laundry, to shirts that is not consistent with the way that the owners treat those guys.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, and that's kind of gotten into my head as I watch the middle rounds of these playoff series. It's like, not only am I watching these things happen, I mean, there's enough games where you can follow like drama as it happens in front of you, but I'm constantly doing that GM thing, being like, oh, this doesn't matter. This outcome does not matter because so and so, like, the Warriors won't look like this next year, so we should enjoy them in the moment. But like, I'm just thinking about New York or LA. And even last night, every time Durant touched the ball, some guy was near a mic just screaming like New York Knicks, and it became a thing that people kept on hearing.
It was an interesting night for the Knicks because you had Kyrie, a potential free agent target, losing, and then you had Durant, the main free agent target, losing in their game against the Rockets, which now makes that series an interesting 2-2.
For sure. And there's like, I know I'm an annoying Knicks fan, but there's like, and I always bring up this word, there's like a melancholy, right? Like, you know, our dream is to get Kyrie and KD as Knicks fans. I say we, but they're going to leave us like they left everyone else. You know, like,
Well, it's also, you guys are rooting to like steal someone else's girlfriend.
I don't like it. Like, so
They're not your guys. It's
Yeah.
you just coveting someone from afar, being like, well, I get a good job and I have a nice house, so maybe he'll be unhappy or she'll be unhappy with him and come and live with me.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, like get your own shit.
Like immediately when I thought that was possible, when they cleared that space with the Porzingis trade, I was just like, "This is going to be incredible." And that lasted for like an hour, and I'm like, "I'm willing to ride with our draft pick this year and Mitchell Robinson, man. It feels like hours. We're not, a championship would be great, of course, but like you said, like these guys are mercenaries, and I love mercenaries. Let them go to Brooklyn. I'm cool with
by no means am I suggesting that the Knicks shouldn't sign those guys if they want to play there.
immediately, right?
Obviously,
Immediately,
no question.
right. But am I going to be heartbroken if they don't? Like, nah.
I think we can also say that signing free agents, signing star free agents, is not an actual plan.
No, but it's the Knicks plan, but it's not a good
But
plan.
it's been the Knicks' failed plan many times over. It was the Lakers' failed plan many times over. It's been the Mavericks' failed plan many times over. It's not a plan.
Yeah.
When you look at what Toronto or Philly or Boston, you can try to sign those guys, but you build it yourself and hopefully you add them. Hopefully you can get an Al Horford to sign with you. But the real thing is you got to build it first. So the Knicks might get lucky, but it's not a plan.
It doesn't feel right. But so in the moment watching these playoffs, like that's why I asked you, is this player movement good or bad for the league? Because it's super fun to be like, we're watching Kyrie, Knicks property, Durant, Knicks property. But
I like it. I think it's fun.
it's like an audition. These are all auditions, and it is fun. And I get a kick out of it for sure.
Kyrie and Kevin both lost tough, meaningless games in their Knicks tape.
Why would Kawhi Leonard risk injury in this meaningless series when he's just going to be a Knicks legend moving forward?
Well, let's talk a second here, though, about specifically the Rocks Warriors. So the Warriors won a contested first game in which there were a lot of complaints about the officiating. And we talked about this last week about the refereeing and how this matchup between arguably two of the best teams in the NBA.
We've been waiting for this.
I've been waiting for it. They played last year. Has become a referendum on the way that players massage the referees. But now we're at a different place in that series.
Thankfully.
Because there's still that lobbying going on, but it's 2-2. And I guess my point earlier about the sort of lack of emotion in Boston, Milwaukee, was only because the next game last night was the one between the Rockets and the Warriors. And it's such a seething dislike between these teams. It's not that it's incredibly brutal and physical. Like, there are moments that there's just a tension of fuck you and
Some
every
salty dudes,
it's so
man.
salty, and it's not just about the officiating. They just genuinely detest each other.
I love it. Like CP3 especially. I think of CP3 and Draymond Green. I mean, because Harden is pretty benign. I think he does his thing.
But people get mad at him though, and he's part of this whole issue
Yes.
with refereeing and complaining and flopping. And
I mean, Golden State Warriors as a team invented that. They wrote the book on all of that.
yeah, they cannot get the moral high ground here.
No.
Draymond definitely pretended to get elbowed in the head last night.
Yeah, for sure.
Crumpled and was holding his skull as they went to commercial and they showed the replay, and it did not look like he suffered much contact. I could be wrong, but from the angle I saw,
everyone knew it. It was fine. It's like, oh, I almost popped out one of Harden's eyeballs. I'm just gonna wave my hands around his eyes all series, and he got him again. It's wild. I hope
and then Durant elbowed Harden in the head inadvertently.
inadvertently.
And as Harden was on the ground, Draymond was standing next to him, kind of waving at him, this fucking guy. As Durant stood next to him, rubbing his elbow in pain.
But Durant, to his credit, immediately when that happened and Harden was on the ground and we hadn't seen the replay, they're like, he's faking it again. But then Durant was like, my elbow's killing me and his head must be fucking killing him.
Yeah, and he
So
kind of walked over there. But Dre was like, this guy. And I'm like,
I love Dre. That's
no,
awesome.
but I like all of this.
Yeah.
And I saw someone on Twitter was kind of saying how this is deeply unfun and I don't like this. I'm like, I love this shit.
Oh,
There's actual stakes and tension. It's stressful to watch.
Well, I mean, there's always going to be that knee jerk person around one of your friends who's just like, either they're like, this is not real basketball. Like, we haven't watched anything beautiful. This is all just like fighting. And then the next person being like, oh, I miss the 90s where everyone would just fight. Like, you just can't please everybody.
Yeah, to me, it reminds me of those few sort of refereed competitive games that I've been in where you really don't like who you're playing with, and it is a totally different energy.
Yeah.
It's so tight and salty. You're just mad and you hate who you're playing against, and you pick that vibe up from this series, and it's I don't know. I can't say I feel that in any of these other ones that are going on, despite the fact that they're competitive and everyone's playing hard and they're physical. There's just that like, oh, these dudes, man. I like. Let's make it ugly. Let's fall on the ground. Let's flop. Let's do anything in our power to beat them. Let's claw out their eyes. There is just a different tension.
I'm not good at playing basketball and I'm very short, but I used to play high school ball, so I just can be on a court and not hurt a team. So I used to play pickup on the Christie Street courts when I first moved back from college. And I stopped because everything will get so personal. Like, invariably, there would be someone there being like, game on. And I'm like, oh, fuck, this guy's serious. All right. And then I would just like end up seething about like a missed shot or like some ball out that I disagreed with. And I was like, this is hurting my life. You know, I would just walk around seething and be like, oh, that motherfucker.
Well, that's kind of it. This series feels personal for a lot of these guys, and organizationally, the fact that Morey has built the Rockets specifically to take on this Golden State team, and they've got personnel that are like supposed to stymie Durant, and then in a weird way, Curry almost doesn't seem built for this. That doesn't mean he's not phenomenal. Obviously, he's an incredible Robin to Durant's Batman. But Curry kind of doesn't have that same just shittiness to him.
Neither does Klay Thompson. The Splash Brothers don't have that gene.
Durant has it. Draymond has it. Harden has it.
Andrew Bogut has it.
Chris Paul has it. PJ Tucker has it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying those other guys are not competitive and don't want to win. Like, of course they do, except for Curry, who missed that last shot because he didn't want
Wanted enough.
to go in as much as the Rockets wanted it to
Like,
miss.
in terms of like Robins, Tucker's good, but Curry's. We have to admit Curry's better than Tucker.
He's a fantastic Robin.
Yeah. I mean, Clay is probably better than Tucker, but I'm not sure. Shumpert, you take Clay over Shumpert for sure.
Is Clay good?
Yeah.
Yes, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we can
for sure.
we can agree he's good.
Yeah, I think
Is he really good?
Yeah.
I don't know that he is.
True. I just don't think he's getting. Okay, this is awesome because it's back to our conversation last week where Durant is such a nuclear weapon. He's like deleting the Splash Brothers in real time.
He is the Splash Brother.
He is one Splash Bro. And he's erasing.
The Splash Brother and the Washed Brothers.
Oh, man. But like Clay is not getting shots. Clay excels in catch and shoot, and he's not getting his looks where he likes to get his looks.
Because Durant's an ISO guy.
Because Durant's an ISO guy, and they kind of are more. I keep on saying this phrase because I love it. Release valves for Durant's like kind of if he gets double teamed, he kicks it out, and then Clay's like not in the spot where he enjoys to shoot. Whereas before, like the well-tuned machine that won all those regular season games, it was like this beautiful basketball.
This also might be a product of the way that they're being defended.
Oh yeah,
Just-
they've been game planned.
Just as a suggestion, there's no way that the Rockets are accidentally doing anything. Whether it works or not is a different story. They are for sure putting thought into their approach to how Klay Thompson gets touches, what Klay Thompson can do to them at different times, because Klay shot a lot this year.
Yeah, and it was a down year efficiency wise. But what I really loved was like not only do they think about all these things, they also kept it simple. So at the end, kind of towards the middle of the fourth quarter, Chris Paul and Harden just kept on switching to get some guy on Curry. There's like we just want Curry defending, so keep on setting picks and switching so we get their weakest defender on us to reasonable success, right?
I mean, Clay shot 18 times a game this season, which is actually the most of his entire career. Which is interesting that he was not someone who took a back seat over the course of this season. And he was a priority in a way that he's always been. But in this series, he doesn't feel like that.
Right. I mean, but he's still a good defender, even though his stats don't really reflect that because
I'm not sure he's a good defender. I think he's okay. I think he's pretty good.
he's good for a guard. I like him as a defender.
I agree.
Yeah.
Especially when he always has to take a tougher challenge because Curry is smaller.
Yeah, and like I think the Rockets were built. I think Morey built an ISO team because what we saw him doing this series is just like he's like we're gonna go up against Golden State. Our entire Harden run will be predicated on whether we beat this team or not, and they were isolating on Curry the whole time. And all their players kind of function in that isolation, right? They all know where to stand. They all have their spots. And as Chris Paul and James Harden kind of work this kind of chess move, everyone's in the right place. So it's not like the Warriors where it's like if Durant slows everything down through ISO and gets the matchup he wants, like Clay's like, I'm not in my favorite place.
I also don't know if we have any incredible takeaways thus far because it's 2-2. If you look at the total points in the series, Golden State scored literally one more
And
than
they've
the
held
Rockets.
court. It's
The
fine.
Rockets could have won game one, and Golden State could have won last game easily.
I mean,
We're talking about 2 coin flips.
What's
in
true has
game 1
always
and
been
4.
true, right? Like they are coin flips, but you need to win those coin flips. And also, Golden State has been beatable. We've been saying this for a year. They are beatable by the Rockets. I don't know if the Rockets are going to win at all. Golden State's a really fucking good team.
They're really good. And this is making me reevaluate one thing here, though. Are the Rockets better than Golden State?
Yeah, sure. You can argue that. You can
I'm not
argue.
even saying it. I'm just bringing up as an idea because they beat them every time this year. They now have beaten them 2 of the last 3 games and could be up 3-1 potentially, and they could be down.
My
But
rebuttal to that.
I'm just saying over the course of the season and right now, they could have beaten them 7 of the last 8 times.
My rebuttal to that would be this is a different Draymond Green. Like, Draymond Green clearly was going at 60 miles per hour all season, and he's turned it up. He is the player that I thought was going to be a Hall of Famer.
And Golden State makes Andre Iguodala makes 2 layups in last game that he chokes, or Livingston makes one of them.
Where the fuck has Livingston been,
He's been
man?
terrible.
Really
But those
bad.
guys are also old.
Yeah, true.
What I think is interesting about this series stylistically is we know the pace is going to be there. You know, the teams are pushing the ball. But I really love how the Rockets go small a lot, and they just keep pushing the ball over and over. And,
PJ Tucker, man.
I mean, Eric Gordon
player.
was just phenomenal last night.
He was he's in the zone, right? The Piz zone right now. It's amazing.
The way that when they just get scored on and just run it right back at you and come up and chuck a 3 and go back and do it again, I love that shit. Just the dedication to an idea is fucking fantastic to me. And when people get mad at Harden, this guy is a virtuoso. The stuff he's doing is
best.
just magic.
He's the best. I mean, him and Curry, like, let's not take enough where we don't enjoy these guys in the moment because they're like 2 of the most fun players I've ever seen. I think Durant's better than both of them, but I don't enjoy watching Durant as much as those guys.
That's the tragedy of Golden State, though, is that Durant is better than Curry. He just is. He's better.
Yeah, he's better than anybody.
He might be the best scorer that's ever lived.
Dude, he's better than anybody on a basketball court at any time right now.
I think LeBron's passing and his defense put him ahead of Durant all time, but Durant is arguably
Right now, yeah.
the best scorer in the history of the NBA. He's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And Curry's really freaking good.
Yeah.
But we don't get to see the exciting, fun Curry dashing around. They don't do the ball motion stuff that they used to where Curry would run in circles and the ball would whisk around the perimeter and Clay would get it and someone would drive and then Draymond would make a pass. It's just like give the ball to Durant, and he drops 40.
Yeah.
Just kind of being Kevin Durant, sometimes
Yeah.
driving, sometimes drawing fouls, mostly shooting. And then Curry gets his looks and Clay gets his looks. That's the thing that I feel like makes Golden State far less likable. There isn't that beautiful machine of offensive architecture that they had when they first emerged as a title winning team. This is a different mercenary team that we are dying to see lose.
Yeah, and Draymond Green is no longer the quarterback of that team. And when the Splash Brothers were breaking all those records, like the Draymond effect was so big. The Draymond Iggy effect was so big. And it was a joy to watch. It was like one of the coolest basketball teams we've ever seen. And, I hear a lot of Portland Blazers fans being like, well, if Durant indeed leaves, like, we might be in good shape. And I'm like, no, this Golden State Warriors team still sweeps you.
Well, what's great is these, other than Boston, Milwaukee, which is a 3-1 series at this point, everything else is 2-2. And that's all we wanted out of this because these were really enticing matchups. They're 8 of the best teams in the league. And thus far, we're going to get at least 3 series that will go 6 games. And as fans,
This is awesome.
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about the last Sixers-Toronto game. And that was another series that Philly had a chance to take a commanding lead, 3-1, and lost a close game. That the Raptors managed to pull one out in Philly and even it up at 2-2.
Yeah, with a Siakam that was banged up. What was Ben Simmons doing this game? Was he in the game? Is this another Poogate scenario? He was like running back in transition and would just not follow Kawhi, his man. Kawhi had so many open looks. Simmons was just running by him and looking at him shoot.
One thing about Simmons that he always gets criticized, and there were moments when he was impassive, for sure. There was a couple times when he had an open look and would kick it out. We've talked about this before. You can't put him on the court next to someone like Greg Monroe. It doesn't work. And
I'm just talking about man-on-man.
no, I know
defense
the
and
plays you're
transition.
talking about. There was a couple there was one where I know specifically one
Sure.
where he seemed to think that Embiid was coming out towards Kawhi and kept going because he was running that direction, and then no one picked up Kawhi. There was a few things like
They
that.
didn't stop the ball.
That was just poor communication.
Sure,
I don't think
sure.
that can be blamed on Simmons because someone's got to talk.
And Kawhi's shot went down. If it doesn't go down, we don't really talk about
But
it.
if you look at that specific play, and I'm not even excusing Simmons, it's everyone's fault. But you see Embiid is coming kind of outwards,
Sure.
and so is someone else. And I think he was trying to like sprint to a corner or something, and they left him open. But you can't put him on the floor and expect anything when you're putting Greg Monroe out there. You just can't do it.
Or Boban.
Or Boban. You can't do it. And it's one of those things like saying, well, why doesn't Curry post up more? Like, you know what he is. He's not a post player. Simmons needs to score in the paint. So if you're upset about his production, when you put someone in his spot, Greg Monroe or Boban or any other guy who literally lives in the place where Ben scores his points, you can't blame him.
I agree. I
In
mean,
36, here's a crazy stat though. In 36 minutes with Greg Monroe in this series, Simmons has 4 points. In 36 minutes on 2 of 7 shooting.
maybe he doesn't want it enough.
He might not want it. But it's crazy. Like Philly keeps trotting out big men who play in the post, who can't shoot and can't catch lobs. And then people are like, Simmons has disappeared. That's like a third to a quarter of his minutes in this entire series have been played next to a dude who literally stands where he scores.
Right. Right. Like, yeah, if you add Kevin Durant to the Nuggets, Jokic is a different player.
That could even work. This is a very specific thing.
Right.
You're putting 2 guys who can't shoot, who score in the paint in the same place, but one of them has to be on the ball. Like you see it. He starts driving and Greg Monroe is standing there. Yeah. Greg Monroe steps out 2 feet and suddenly Marc Gasol is blocking Simmons' shot. I'm just saying this is a personnel issue and they're going to have to either say, Simmons, you're playing center, or just stop expecting him to produce in those minutes. Right. He can't do it, and it's his fault in a grand sense. But he's a known. And that's on Elton Brand, and that's on Brett Brown. We've known for 2 years Ben Simmons can't survive offensively with a post big who doesn't have range.
And a great point that people have been making is like the advantage of Embiid lies in like in a lot of these games, teams have to hide their center, however good they may be. Like Clint Capella is really good and the most ethical player in the NBA. There's no one more ethical than
Very
Clint Capella.
moral.
Very moral. Shout out to Mitchell Robinson, also ethical. But like Embiid is a player you don't have to hide. So the Sixers have a 5 that is a plus for them in every single situation. He is a top 10 player, so it almost gives them an unfair advantage where they don't have to go small ever. Like he is the one you guard, and all the other teams have like 4 other players, but the Sixers have the extra one. And when Embiid is not feeling right, like last game, this whole thing kind of like de-evolves really quickly in front of your eyes. Not because it can't work, it's because they're not used to it. And they don't know what Embiid is at any moment. So I can see like Simmons looking at Embiid being like, how you feeling, dude? And he's like, I'm okay, feed me the rock. And he gets the rock and like, something's wrong, you're not right.
Yeah, and you're seeing the latest
The rock.
gripe from Sixers fans who have seemed to have a real what's the word I'm looking for? A real affinity for turning on their own players in a bizarre way because the Sixers have 3 star
It's a
players.
Philly thing. It's a working like a blue collar thing.
It's weird. They just turn against their stars constantly, and they turned against Simmons all the time. They turned against Butler all the time.
Brown.
They turn against Brett Brown, but now they've criticized Embiid as for being sick. And it's this idea of like, well, he's out of shape. He's not eating right. He doesn't have good work ethic. Man, the guy got sick. Like, well, who could get sick twice in 3 days or
Many
in 3
people,
games?
myself.
What do you mean? You think he didn't get sick?
Yeah.
You think he's lying? And then I think Jason Williams on ESPN was like, oh, if you're sick like that, you can't be a game time decision if you're Embiid. You got to like hide that and go out there. I'm like, what?
So dumb.
You thought he should conceal the fact that he was sick from his coach?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you got to want it more. Like, he's sick. And I don't really understand this issue. And look, Embiid's conditioning is not the best. He's had a knee injury for 2 years. He has periodic times when he sits. He sat 14 of the last 24 games of the year. It's not easy to stay in great shape when you're sitting out for a month and a half.
I agree, and that's like the Sixers will be eliminated before they win the championship. And the lasting thought I'll have with them, it's like I always think of Embiid like a bunch of our friends that we've been hanging out in New York City with for the last 2 decades. Like super talented, awesome to hang out with. Can hang out really late, super funny throughout. They don't get winded. But then, like, slowly as they get older, and not to say Embiid is old, it's like a lot of things go wrong. It's just like they develop anxieties. Oh, no more gluten. It's like, oh, I got married, I can't stay out. So it's always like all these factors go into it. And I always go back to like the 3 things. Like, you have to be good at 2 or 3 things, right? Like likable, on time, or good at what you do. Embiid is so likable, so good at what he does. It's not quite on time, but he's those 2 things. So that makes him a superstar. As soon as he's not good at what he does, he's only likable. So it becomes like a thing where it's just like you look at Embiid and I'm just like, oh my God, how did this unravel? Because like, I don't care if he tells his coach he's sick, if he has poo problems, hilarious, or anything. It's like sometimes I watch him at the end of games. I'm like, he's too tired to fight for a loose ball.
And again, I think this does come back to just the knee injuries. And my thing is, let's not make this a moral thing.
No.
I'm not saying you were, but people are. That this is because he's eating wrong. This is because his work ethic is wrong. He doesn't care enough. There's this inclination, and that's kind of what we've been talking about all day, for people to create moral quandaries, moral moments of judgment where it's like, well, here's the thing. He wouldn't be sick if he was in better shape. And you're like, well, that's just not true. Those are two different things. And maybe he's not in shape because he's a giant who has a hurt knee. And it's maybe a situation that is a problem, but maybe no one's at fault. Maybe no one is responsible. Maybe no one is weakness and that we could wag our finger at and be like, you should do something different. You were wrong. Maybe it just sucks.
This is a criticism that I think NBA fans have unfairly levied upon like big men. Like even Shaq being like, "Oh, he's out of shape. Yeah, he doesn't feel like his game is, his mind is in it. It doesn't."
Why is the largest man on earth having trouble staying skinny?
Yeah. And Shaq literally will tell you, he's being like, I'm getting so beat up down there by players like taking shots at me. I'm getting hurt and I can't work out and I'm fucking tired. And I'm like, that checks out. That totally makes sense, right?
Look, we watch Embiid move and we marvel at his agility at times. But other ones, you look at him and you can see Yao Ming, Rick Smits. Like
Rick Smits.
The legion of big men, Porzingis, guys who are a little bit bigger. And maybe they're 7'1", they're 7'2". They're not 6'9", they're not 6'11". There's a difference in the way that the human body operates.
When
Once you
Jokic goes to
cross
quadruple overtime, he gets fatigued, man.
But even Jokic is like 6'11", and he's tired, but there's a different skeletal system at play, I think, with some of those guys
Physics,
who are just bigger than humans are actually supposed to be.
Yeah, jumping like 200 times.
And yes, it would be great if Joel Embiid was just incredibly ropey, sinewy, skinny dude.
Yeah.
But there's a reason he's not. And
Yes.
I don't think it's solely because he's got a sweet tooth. I just don't think it's easy for someone who is 7'2" with bad knees to be physically a skinny Adonis.
And this was my point. When they get eliminated, that will be the sadness I have. I'm like, oh, it was, I don't believe in fate, but if I did, I'd think of Joel Embiid being like, he did everything he needed to do. Things didn't work out in terms of he got sick or the poo thing, but he's a big boy and like it just didn't click for him.
But
it could have.
But right,
could have.
I feel like you can see the storm brewing. That when the Sixers had a 2-1 lead and he came in, he was sick. He did not have a good game. And if they lose the series, you can see the narrative slowly coming into place that Embiid was not in good enough shape.
Because
he
we're
didn't have
sad.
conditioning. He got sick, as if coming down with the shits is something that happens because you're slightly too heavy.
This is a question of like fans thinking they have control, like human beings have control over certain things that they don't really have control over. And of course, Embiid be like, yo, I ate that giant cheesesteak and that's why I got sick. Like it's so funny because I saw him eating grapes on the court, like, and they played it as a funny thing. And I'm like, is that how he got sick? Because grapes are like really tough to clean and you get tummy problems a lot with grapes, And we're talking about things like fans are just like, well, if I was in that position, I would have made the right decision. And I'm like, no, they made all the right decisions. It's unlucky. Like things just happen in the universe and we try to explain them in this small like vacuum of a playoff series. And none of these things are explainable.
I worked on a really depressing story maybe 10 years ago, whatever, for a magazine. And it was about the rapper Big Lurch. I don't know if you remember that guy.
Yeah.
But he was from Houston, ended up in L.A., was part of a group, I believe it was called Cosmic Slop Shop, and it had like a producer who ended up doing work for Jay-Z later, Rick Rock. But anyway, they were a rap group. He was into drugs. He was also 6'7" and like a huge dude. But he was into smoking sherm, which is basically dipping a cigarette or a joint or a blunt into embalming fluid. And it makes you go crazy.
That's fucking crazy.
It's like
You
it's
can't
like
do
dust.
that.
It's dust,
Oh, Jesus.
Right, so it could be called wet, angel dust.
No camp shaming.
Sherm.
But, oof.
Right, so anyway, he flipped out, beat his roommate's girlfriend to death,
Jesus. I did not know that.
ate her, or parts of her.
Oh, because he was mentally fucking insane.
Out of his mind.
Yeah.
Literally ripped her body apart and was arrested naked, walking down the street with her lungs hanging out of his mouth. Sorry for the visuals, folks. I'm just
Dude.
saying it was a very, very gnarly story. So I went out to LA and I interviewed him many times from prison. I interviewed his family members. I interviewed family members of the victim, people who were in the same rap group as him, people who worked with him, etc. You know, it was a story about this whole situation. I read all the court reports. Like what I just gave you was a small section of what I read 700 pages of. Anyway, the point was, when I spoke with his mom or the victim's mom or the victim's dad or all these people, everyone wanted there to be a point. There was either a conspiracy that he was actually innocent, that there was a lesson to be learned here, that mistakes were made and that this could somehow be turned into a learning, an experience in which we could gain something
glean
from
some
it.
lesson,
Something. There
right.
was some silver lining here about the way we should treat each other or something. And there fucking wasn't. It was just a really bad story in which a bunch of people who were mixed up in kind of bad stuff had awful things happen to them. And there was no upside. There was no glory. There was no conspiracy. There was no anything. It was just bad shit happens.
That's kind of like one of the biggest things I think about with everything, and like being a Knicks fan is not related to this, and trying to explain why teams win and lose. Like, I don't know why Houston will lose this series. I can tell you all the things I think, and I don't know why Golden State might lose. Like, the outcome is kind of independent than any like kind of framework or rule, right? Because, you know, we could talk about how these teams are built and what transpires. And of course, something like the horse race this week happens and someone violates a rule and the second place winner wins. Like, okay, that's why the second place winner win. But I don't know why that horse violated that rule. So, you know, you pull back enough and you can't really explain that much. And I wish Jordo was here because, you know, usually he'd just be like, then what does anything matter? And that's kind of my question. And we're kind of seeing that in LA, right? Like, what a story franchise the Lakers have been for so long. A lot of success, a lot of all-time great players still hanging around that organization. Jeanie Buss, well-respected, well-loved in the NBA inner circles. And they've had kind of trouble identifying what I think they would describe as culture, right? Because culturally, they're a successful organization, and they've had certain people in place that have taken them to the end with success. And now they're trying to surround themselves with those same people, but the results have changed. And we're trying to explain it in a way that I don't necessarily think that we're doing the right way.
So I'm assuming this leads into their potential hiring of Tyronn Lue, who was
Champion.
who was a former Laker on the teams that had Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. He was most known in NBA circles for the series against the Sixers, in which he was tasked with guarding Allen Iverson. At times, he did a decent job.
At times, Iverson stepped right over him.
But his most iconic moment is unfortunately being prone on the ground with AI scornfully stepping over him. But I digress. The idea of Laker culture is interesting because they are a fabled franchise. They have won a bunch of titles. There is a mystique that ties to the Showtime Lakers. But what we're really talking about is just winning, right? So the Lakers are doing the classic kind of survivorship bias, the reverse engineering of winning, to say, I know we had Kobe and Shaq, and then Karl Malone and Gary Payton and Mitch Richmond and Horace Grant and Eddie Jones and Eldon Campbell.
I forgot about Horace Grant.
We had all these dudes who came by, and they somehow contributed to Laker culture. No, you had a bunch of good players, and you had James Worthy and Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and you've had the fortune of possessing, as a franchise, Wilt Chamberlain, and it just goes on and on and on. But in their mind, it's Laker culture. It's not a bunch of guys who are really good at basketball.
Their guy's the logo of the league, right? Jerry West. And it's like, and it's so interesting how we frame like the last run they had as the Kobe run, because it's the Pau Gasol run. But like he's not really a dynamic personality. He's a foreign player. He was a mercenary as well. But Pau and Odom were such savvy gets for that team. I think Kupchak did a great job. I think it was Kupchak who got them.
I mean, you look at that team in retrospect, and granted, it's built in a more bulky way than a modern team would be. But the wealth of talent, when you consider they had Pau Gasol, Andrew Bynum, Lamar Odom, and Kobe Bryant, like
It's formidable.
as a front line, you might have had 3 of like the top 10 big guys in the entire NBA, and then Kobe as the Robin to sort of dribble the ball up to get it to those elite bigs.
Yeah, and the elite bigs kind of like take you all the way through the race, and then the small guy jumps off the wagon and runs across the finish line.
That's literally what happened that year. I mean, people think we're joking. Pau Gasol was definitely their best player, at least
So good.
At least their second year they won it.
Yeah.
And Lamar was awesome, and Bynum was awesome, and Kobe would shoot more than all of them combined. And people are like, Kobe with another win. You're like, you could also feed the dudes who are more efficient and currently better.
Pau Gasol would be like clapping under the basket as Kobe takes like an 18-footer.
Kobe! Yeah. Like, I know they won a championship, but that team was so ridiculously stacked.
Stacked. And like we, like even I try to frame it as like a Dolan. I'm more in Dolan because, Dr. Buss was the head of that organization during all that time. And as soon as he passed away and handed it to his kids, like nothing good very much happened. And there was disorganization, as we found out later. But I can't even attribute their lack of success to that even because, you're Dan Gilbert, you luck into LeBron James, and all of a sudden you're a champion with Tyronn Lue.
So instead of, I guess, analyzing whether we think Tyronn Lue is a great coach or not, I think he's fine. Like we can just leave that in that place. Mm-hmm. What does Jeannie Buss think that Laker culture is? If you had to say to her, or excuse me, if you asked her,
What would I expect her to say?
yeah, what do you think that her idea of it is? Because clearly it's reflected in what Magic also thinks it is, and is there a coherent idea among the people who are building this franchise of what Laker culture is?
Do you think there's a bias because of Irvin Johnson's nickname? I think that would kind of frame her answer. I think it would be like certain winners, certain people just get it, and therefore they put themselves in the position to win. She would speak in a corporate language for sure, and be like, it takes hard work, it takes an and she would talk about luck, being like the opportunity to accept luck around. But I think she would mostly talk about like the je ne sais quoi, right? Like a vibe. She would be more Grateful Dead than anything.
No, I agree with that. And I think there's something beautiful about the idea of Laker culture because it involves entertainment.
Yeah.
It's
Showtime.
showmanship.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like if dudes are from Harlem, there's like, yeah, they're from Harlem. There's got to be a little like extra like zip, a little more elan or swag to the way they dress. Like Brooklyn, working class, but like Uptown, that's like Dapper Dan.
For sure.
Harlem rappers always have been about, yeah, we're
Cameron.
rapping, but
Diplomats.
we're fashionable.
Yeah, man.
We're showy.
Pink furs.
And I think that's cool because in the NBA, there's no other franchise that actually values showmanship. The Nets rebuilt their franchise as being Spurs East. The Spurs are like, we're purposefully anonymous. We're grinders. We actually stay beneath the radar so you underestimate us. The Knicks have this dumb idea of being working class.
Charles
Sixers,
Oakley, yeah.
working class. Everyone's working class. Miami is kind of
Flashy.
weirdly... No, but without LeBron, they're still kind of now working class.
Well, I was trying to figure this out.
Everyone just says they're working class.
Everyone wants to be working class.
Except
the Lakers.
which is awesome.
Yes, which is awesome. And, you know, this is something I always want the NBA to be like, more like the Lord of the Rings, being like, oh, you have wandered up to the Northeast where these pale warriors with their lunch pails, like Pat Connaughton and Layman and Gordon Hayward, will fight you. Oh, you've wandered to the West where it's beautiful and sunny, where these beautiful Adonises will dribble you to death. You know, like, I love that.
That's
shit.
why LeBron and those guys being in South Beach was so perfect and way more interesting than LeBron coming back to Cleveland.
Yeah.
Them bringing star power and championships to South Beach is freaking
Awesome.
great. It's like
Super good
a bunch
theater.
of Argentinians and Lamborghinis and like clubs with foam parties. Like they were that. And that was why the Heatles were the shit. And they were magnetic.
Yeah, and that's like the framework I'm dying for. It's just like, oh, Toronto, this the Night King, the soulless Night King from the North is coming for you. It's just like, it's awesome shit.
Yeah, Kawhi is that.
Yeah.
And we kind of zipped past the Sixers series a bit because we've talked about it a lot. And
You hate Kawhi Leonard. Let's do this, man.
is Kawhi fun to you?
Yes.
Really? Honestly,
Do your thing.
maybe
do your
the-
thing.
Okay, so people get mad at Harden, but Harden is an artist. He is gifted. He is creative. He does all these things that require imagination and guile, and he's very incredibly human. There is a part of his game that relies on tricking the officials and tricking teammates, and if you're looking at it in some weird mythological standpoint, he's the trickster. He has to, that's a prototype. He has to use smarts and cunning along with his skills to achieve his goals. And Kawhi to me is so boring. And I guess they're playing the team I like, so that's why I'm anti Kawhi. But it's a dreary dominance where there are certain plays that are awesome. When he grabbed the ball away from Jimmy Butler and kind of like choked him out while stealing it, he got called for the foul. It was probably not one. That was awesome. That was just this weird, physically overpowering guy with like abnormally big hands, just using his claws to steal the ball away from Jimmy Butler. But Kawhi pulling up and hitting every single 16-footer, like, this is joyless. This is just trash. It's deeply, deeply whack.
I agree that he's whack.
He's awesome.
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
a
he's
great
awesome.
player.
Yeah.
But being a 47% mid-range shooter for your entire career, including this season, and then making 65 in the playoffs, like, whoop-de-fucking-do, man. Like, you're more excellent right now than you are all year long. But it's not interesting.
It's like Karl Malone getting mad because I think Kobe waved him off for an ISO in the All-Star game. I forget, or was that Iverson? I forget. But, right, and no one's denying the greatness of Kawhi Leonard at all. But
Literally not being critical
Yeah.
of him one iota.
Yeah.
He is keeping the Raptors in the series. He's single-handedly won the last game and game one. Or, excuse me, single-handedly won game 4 to prevent it from being a 3-1 Sixers lead.
are we falling under the trappings of dribble bias here? He's not like a necessarily beautiful player. Like, he doesn't move like Michael Jordan. He's more.
I'm
he's stiff,
only
right?
speaking in 100% bias. Like bias across the board.
Right.
Sixers bias, dribble bias,
Yeah.
crouch bias,
Yeah.
math bias, everything
Slapping glass bias.
everything that he's doing to beat the Sixers is detestable.
Right, because the Sixers to me are so joyful, right? Because
But
they
they're also doing this right. They're
Yes,
also
yes.
guarding him perfectly for the most part.
Yeah, no.
There were some breakdowns
yeah.
across the board, and they left a lot of shooters open that they probably would have lost last game, even if Kawhi had shot like a mortal. If some of those other dudes on that team had made wide open looks, they missed a ton of really open threes that probably evened everything out. But you're like, cool, Kawhi, you did a bunch of pull-up jumpers, and you're making them at a pace that easily outflanks your normal rate. Whoop-de-fucking-do, dude.
But I love that, right? Because a good player doesn't have to be enjoyable or fun, right? Like when Carmelo Anthony in New York got mad at Jeremy Lin during Linsanity, I'm like, oh, you're better than Jeremy Lin. We're not claiming he's going to be a higher paid player eventually or the star of this team. You're the star of this team, but we just love him more. We'll never love you as much as we love him from now on. And he recognized that a little bit, being like, they're always going to love him and I'm going to be the better player. And I think certain all-time greats have that chip on their shoulder a little bit.
And it also comes down to the fact that Kawhi doesn't have a personality to make up for the fact that he's doing or he's successfully making shots that are not that aesthetically pleasing, which is interesting because everyone talks about the lost art of the mid-range. The mid-range is boring.
Yeah.
Getting to the basket is interesting.
Threes are super fun.
Threes are fun. Passing is fun.
Dunks are
Cutting,
fun.
dunking, taking 14-footers and making them not that exciting. But Kobe had a personality that went along with that. And someone like DeRozan was kind of interesting because of his weaknesses, that he had to do that because he like couldn't shoot. Or
CJ McCollum is an electrifying player to watch. He's not even in the same conversation as Kawhi Leonard.
like Melo's another guy who loved mid-ranges, but it was also it's like Melo, it's Melo time. Kawhi's just really good at it and doesn't have a personality to make it part of who he is. You're like, well, he can shoot threes. He can get to the basket. Oh, he's just slaying us in the mid-range. Like, oh,
And it's like,
cool.
yeah, and it's funny that they're playing the Sixers because not only skill wise are players like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid and even Jimmy Butler unique. They're just unique guys in the league that we'll always talk about.
And look, I do not enjoy watching Joel Embiid or Jimmy Butler take mid-range either, or Tobias Harris. So this is not me being singularly anti-mid-range when it comes to watching Kawhi.
Sure.
I don't like watching those guys do it either.
Sure.
I'm just saying they have a little more personality that goes along with
yeah.
it. And it's also that Kawhi is just making them all. Like it's just not
he's
fair.
insane.
It's
He's
not
insane.
fair. That's
Yeah.
my complaint.
Yeah.
It's unethical.
It's deeply unethical. Deeply.
It's
like,
it's unethical.
there's
basketball.
no way Kawhi can pull up and hit that three again. He hit it again.
Threes are fine. It's the mid-range shit, dude. We know his numbers. We have them. And for 4 games, he's just shooting 30
Those are
percentage
ethical.
points higher.
Yeah.
Not ethical.
Threes were not ethical, but anyway.
Depends on who you ask. The interns.
Depends on which intern you get to. But I mean, I stand by this thought that Kawhi is the prize of this offseason. And he's not being talked about that in terms of being better than Durant, in terms of age and what he can do, being more interesting than Kyrie Irving because he's super boring. So people were just sticking him on the Clippers because, like, just go to the Clippers. We should be New York should be fighting for him.
What's interesting about Durant is that his game is not that dissimilar from Kawhi's in terms of a lot of mid-range hits. You know, he's more of a three-point shooter, but I would guess if you looked at the numbers, it's not that divergent. They actually kind of score similarly. They're ISO dudes, capable passers, but they're really foremost guys who get buckets. They're very comfortable shooting the mid-range.
Yeah.
They get to the line a lot. They're really similar offensive profiles in terms of being your primary scoring option. And I never really liked Durant because I found him boring. I found his game, despite it being incredible, sort of unpleasant because he was a super tall guy who could just rain jumpers over you. It was impressive, but I feel like Durant is way more likable, unlikable, interesting now that he's become a different character than he was in Oklahoma City. Because now that I root against him or I root for him or I just feel things about Kevin Durant, when I'm watching him take mid-range jumpers, I don't have the same sort of, I don't know, grumbliness that I do towards Kawhi.
Yeah, and like, I know you don't want to talk about children's stories, but the Night King in Game of Thrones,
Damn it.
not exciting. So when he dies, you're like, cool, out of the way. Just do your thing. You know, like we have interesting characters all over the place and not interesting characters all over the place, but we know we don't like you, so just go away.
That's why the Sixers have to beat the Raptors, because Kawhi is like an amazing mini boss.
Right, right.
Wow, we had to get past that completely weird, demonic, emotionless murderer, and then you can move on to like Giannis, like
Yeah,
the next
yeah,
one.
yeah.
And well, I mean, Giannis versus Kawhi is super exciting too. But I'm saying from a Sixers perspective, Kawhi is really good as like a mini boss.
Yeah, for
He's
sure.
not great as the guy who beats you. He's much better as like a stepping stone.
Yeah, and like, I keep on saying that the Sixers have enough to do this, but like the coins have to flip their ways. And same with Toronto. Toronto, from the Toronto's perspective, like they're good enough to beat the Sixers too.
Yeah, I have no idea who's going to win this series.
Yeah, I don't
because
either. You can make a case for 6 teams in the NBA just going all the way.
I thought Toronto was the better team, and you said you thought the Sixers would win the series, and I think these things have sort of merged together, and either team,
Yeah, I don't know.
there's been a blowout on each side, and there's been a close win on each side. I think Philly has more high end talent, as you had said. I also think Toronto has not played as well as they could have in some ways and missed a lot of shots. And
Can I talk about this
Yeah.
Kevin Arnovitz article that came out? I think it was today. He wrote about Kyle Lowry, and certain people have been dogging him for not having a great statistical playoffs. And Arnovitz, who's a metrics guy, writes for ESPN, I believe, went into kind of like a closer look into what he's doing, and came out of it being like, "Yo, he's the best player on this team." Like he is the heart and soul of how this whole mechanism clicks.
I haven't read this article. What was the gist of why he was more important than, say, a Kawhi Leonard or a Marc Gasol or a Siakam?
In terms of facilitating. So, of course, he's a very dangerous weapon as a finisher, but when he's not finishing, he kind of creates probability for other players, the 4 other players on the floor that are really high. So, the writers don't write their titles, but the title of the article was just like beyond stats, but it's a clear stat. It's plus minus. And sort of in the way Draymond Green affected the Splash Brothers in their most enjoyable time, Kyle Lowry, in this article, he was pointing out a few plays, being like, he would just cut off lanes of defenders, just run in someone's way, or just like identify where someone was going. Hockey assists. I don't want to go into the sin bin, but a pass to an assist. Outlets, seeing lanes, sort of like why I love Lonzo Ball so much and players like Ben Simmons, is because even though they have visible and identifiable weaknesses, because they're not the best finishers at any time on the floor, they do certain things just like zag into a defender where the defender is just like ready for a chase down block.
Lowry is also one of the most egregious floppers in the NBA.
Is it because he can't help it because
I mean,
his
this is-
derriere is out there?
He's very thick. But this is Sixers bias speaking, of course. But man, he flops a lot.
It's never the flopper's fault.
I don't have a problem with flopping.
He could be writhing down on the ground. You have an advantage on the other end.
I don't have an issue with it. I'm just saying, as a quality, that guy flops a lot. Because when they started doing reverse angles of the Ben Simmons play, where he kind of undercut Simmons a little bit, and then Simmons fell, and Lowry sort of sat on him with this enormous keister. If you look at another angle, Simmons just kind of raises his arm without even looking where he's hitting to like free it up. And it didn't look like he made a lot of contact with Kyle Lowry's lower abdomen. And then Lowry crumbled, waited to see if the officials would do anything, and they didn't, and just got up and started running.
So Arnovitz kind of talked about this in his pick and roll defense. And a lot of times when you switch on pick and roll, the guard goes under or over the screen. And, we're celebrated for players who go over the screen because that means like effort and toughness or whatever. But Lowry does this really dangerous play where he puts his arm in between the defenders, and one wrong move and you can just break your arm. But Lowry does this every time, and he kind of disrupts that exchange at the beginning of that play. And
This is on a dribble handoff?
yes, and like he falls down a lot. He creates all this contact in this moment where it disrupts what the offense wants to do and focuses on the scrum at the top of the key. And to to Arnovitz's claim, like not many guards are willing to do that because it's very dangerous.
That makes sense. He's a tough player. He's good, but yeah, I've noticed in this series watching him a lot of minutes over a week. Man, he takes a little bump, he goes flying, he creates a lot of contact. He's a very good player, and I feel bad for him and that his career to this point has been defined by being a postseason failure. He's had a couple. I mean, for the most part, he shot very poorly in the postseason. And it kind of goes to what we were saying about Kyrie, that if the shots aren't falling, you're the same guy. You're doing what you do. It's just kind of a math thing.
Yeah, and there comes to a point where like there's a tip, but like, so Morey was in this article on the record saying the acquisition of Lowry from Memphis was the best move he's ever made as a Houston GM, and I'm like, didn't you trade for James Harden? And they didn't follow that up, but like in terms of value, I could see what he's saying. It's like he didn't have to give as much up for a valuable player. He gave up a lot for Harden, but like so you say like, yeah, I agree. In a vacuum, Kyrie, Steph Curry, they're the same player, and the shots don't go in. At what point are they a different player? Because you can't do this for long enough where you are saying like, oh, Jason Tatum, like you're shooting poorer than you were last year officially now. Or like Giannis being like, he'll shoot his way out of this 3-point woes. I'm like, oh, you ended at 25%. That's not.
Well, to me, when you're looking at the way that smart teams are constructing their personnel, you're trying to find guys who give you something every single night. And spacing is a thing that's always there, even when the shot's not dropping. But you're seeing a newfound emphasis to get away from the unitasker guys who, well, if he's not shooting well, he's not going to give us much. No one cares about that anymore because there's so many dudes who can shoot. So if you're Houston, you're like, well, we want guys who can dribble. We want guys who can break down a defense. We want guys who can pass, and we want guys who can defend and are switchable. And you know what? Is JJ Redick a lot better shooter than Shumpert? Hell yes. But Shumpert can defend, and Shumpert maybe can hit 36%. And we'll take that guy.
Yeah, and that's why one of the interns tweeted like 3-and-D might be a placebo, right? Because you have to do more. You have to be able to dribble. You have to be able to defend now. It's just not 3-and-D. The lifespan of the only 3-and-D guy was really short. It evolved very quickly.
It's very interesting how what we view as modern basketball changes so quickly. And I mean, this is redundant to talk about, but to me, Kevin Love is always such a good example of how a guy just being himself can become in vogue, out of vogue, back in vogue without him changing at all.
Right.
When he was when he was in Minnesota, the fact that he could rebound and he could defend the post and he could score in the post, but was also a very good shooter from three and a good passer, made him the prototypical modern power forward. Yeah. And then he went and became like an obsolete power forward because he can't guard fast fours and he's not big enough to be a five. And then you get back to like this season, you're like, well, actually, now that everyone shoots threes, maybe he is a new modern center. He didn't do anything.
And the cycles are so quick. I always think like save your skinny jeans because in the next year you're going to want them again. Don't throw them out, you know?
Yeah. Thaddeus Young, not quick enough to be a three, not big enough to be a four. Then it was like, well, he's a real four, but he can't shoot well enough. Then he kind of started shooting okay, but not great. And you're like, yeah, he's the prototypical modern four. Yeah. But maybe actually can't dribble well. It's weird. He's like, I'm just me, man. Yeah. I've been like 6'8" and kind of able to shoot mid-range jumpers and have a spin move, and I've been doing that since I was 16.
Yeah, or it's like, yes, save your like torn up heavy metal vintage shirts because you don't want to wear them this year or next year or the year after. But maybe the year after, they're back, baby. But like, I try to say baby once every pod. But so I'm glad we're talking about this because I think this is my takeaway from the playoffs so far. There's certain valuable players that haven't really accrued that many finishing stats, like Middleton, Bledsoe, Lowry, Simmons. They're all over every good team. And we're seeing teams doing the thing that we want them to do is keep it simple. Go through your best player. Use everyone as a release valve for your best player. And you lose or you win going through Harden, Giannis.
Also, that's true, but also your opponents are good enough to take things away.
That too. You're playing the better defenses.
The Rockets are like, well, we're one of the remaining 8 teams in the league. We can take away Klay Thompson for the most part. Toronto's playing against Philly. We have Kawhi Leonard. We're going to put him on Ben Simmons. That'll take away Ben Simmons as a scorer and a distributor. And we've seen that. I mean, that happened. Ben Simmons has more or less been taking off the ball. He's in the dunker spot because if you're Philly, you're kind of all right with Kawhi being in the dunker spot and having to box out Ben Simmons. And the last game we saw
Kawhi leaving him,
where Kawhi started guarding Jimmy Butler. So these are good teams for a reason. And when people aren't as good as they were during the regular season or have a bad game, it's because your opponents are good as shit.
And I kind of hear like the ghost of Hinkie in heaven, rest in peace, being like, I told you guys over and over, it's about the star. You have to get a fucking star. If you get 2, you're fucking good. But 1 is going to be the whole premise of your construction of your team.
I mean, this is pretty obvious though, right? Like Jokic, Lillard, Embiid, Jimmy Butler,
Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard,
and Harden.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you're looking at the superstars of the league.
Yeah. Even Chris Paul, who's like older, but like certainly a second fiddle, sort of like Steph Curry.
And that's why it's a bummer that LeBron's team didn't make the playoffs. 'Cause I just feel like he'd be here. I feel like LeBron would not have lost in the first round no matter what. I mean, unless they play like Golden State, but I kind of just think
he got hurt.
I just think he'd be there.
Lonzo Ball and him got hurt, and that was the end. But that team was going to make the playoffs, and it's a shame we don't get the Lakers with LeBron this month.
Oh, well. Fuck it.
Fuck it. Doesn't mean anything.
That was as good as we can do without.
Are we going to start a new criteria of perfect?
I wouldn't say it was an imperfect pod, but without Jordan, there's just a threshold. It's like
there's no way it could be the same kind of perfect.
If you don't have Draymond, how are you the Warriors?
Did we just win the NIT?
That's fair. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed netball season. Off to the next gala. Perfect pod. Cookies.